So the purpose of tonight, back in 2019, we started this process of discussing a business improvement district around the downtown and what that might mean for the businesses and the property owners within that downtown district. There's been some conversation about what exactly the purpose of that business improvement district is and if the downtown truly needs one. And so the purpose of tonight was to re-hone in on why bids are important for communities and what we can utilize them for in Stevens Point. So quickly over tonight, I was kind of hoping for a few more people because I wanted this meeting to be more interactive. So I think we're going to need to reevaluate how we're going about our interactive portion of tonight because we truly need a little bit different engagement from folks to prep the bid board if we start this business improvement district for that initial phase of getting started. So tonight we'll just go through a recap of what's happened up to this point. Ryan will give a feedback or some background information for those of you who don't know what a business improvement district is, how it works, and how it's different than some of the services that the city and the Stevens Point Alliance provide the downtown already, how Wisconsin communities are leveraging those business improvement districts, and then possibilities for how those funds could be spent and used to benefit downtown business owners and property owners. I want to spend the bulk of tonight doing that, acknowledging that we don't have a full room tonight. Maybe we'll change the role of tonight based on that. Question, Kathy?
Yes, I think we need to introduce ourselves as to what we are as far as business owners, property owners.
Sure. If we could just do a quick round of introductions. Thank you, Kathy. My name is Chris. I'm the neighborhood planner and business or economic development specialist for the city of Stevens Point. I'm joined.
Ryan Kronowski, Director of Community Development.
My name is Lynn True. I'm one of the owners of Bound to Happen Books and Process General Store at 1008 Main Street downtown.
So you rent?
We do rent.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm the manager of call it Antique Small on the square.
Kind of owner of Sunset Point Winery. Actually, it's owned by my daughter, but I run it and we own the building and the business.
Troy Askew, Graffiti Sports Pub, run it and own it.
Fran Makaroff, and I have recently moved here from the south, and I am retired from Hillsborough County.
No business or entity downtown at this point.
Might be good. Couple of buildings downtown, and we just opened up Mission Coffee downtown.
Benjamin Ness. I am the Stevens Point Campus Dean for Mid-State Technical College. I guess we own this property. The people own this property. We just caretake it for y'all. Thank you all for coming to Mid-State. Glad you're here.
And Craig, could you just give a verbal introduction?
Hi, I'm Craig, and I am living downtown, and I have a business downtown, Falling Outfitters. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Craig.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And Doug and Judy, we won't forget about you folks.
Hi, it's Doug and Judy Van Berkel. We own Diversity, but we rent the building.
And then at the end of tonight too, thanks again, Kathy. At the end of tonight, let's do a quick countdown to launch our proposed timeline for starting the business improvement district for the downtown and when we can expect to see services hopefully in the near future.
Okay, so just for a quick recap, as some of you might recall, in January of 2020, we held a meeting in this room to talk about the business improvement district. And that really stemmed from a request from the Stevens Point Alliance in late 2019 asking for some funding from the city, which turned into a larger conversation about the possibility of implementing a business improvement district. And that really was city staff looking at the success of other business improvement districts in the state of Wisconsin, trying to replicate that in the city of Stevens Point. And so we established at that time kind of a bid operating committee, which was made up of city staff, members of the Stevens Point Alliance, non-members of the Stevens Point Alliance, and then a few alders as well. And then essentially what happened was in March 2020, COVID occurred, and most of the staff resources were focused more on economic recovery as opposed to focusing on the business improvement district. And it was put on the back burner, never really was able to get off the ground again until 2022. The city, through some strategic restructuring of the community development department, brought on another neighborhood planner and economic development specialist, Chris Plaismith, whose job at one of his tasks when he started was to reintroduce the bid concept to the downtown, because we do see the value in having a business improvement in the downtown area. We do have a draft so that Chris reconvened the working group, took the draft, which a number of us had worked on previously, and started working on it with kind of the newer group, the other operating folks, really just to polish it up and send it back out for consideration. So just real quick, for the sake of the new folks in the room and for a refresher. So in the mid 80s, the Wisconsin state legislature established business improvement districts. Essentially, it sets a defined geographic area and levies an additional property tax on that specific area. And that special property tax is governed by a separate body outside of the city council. So how we've structured it within the proposed operating plan is that we would have 2 property owners, 2 business owners, and 2 on the board of directors as well that own and operate a business. And I believe the alder is also the 7th person. City staff serves in an advisory role and as the executive director for the business improvement district. Much like the city's got a redevelopment authority and much like our housing authority, it's a separate entity. And so one of the questions that came up in 2019, 2020 was, well, could the city collect these funds and apply them to road projects outside the business improvement district? And the short answer is no, that any funds that were collected within the business improvement district have to be utilized within that district. Using those funds outside of that specific geographic area is against state law, and I really have no interest in going to jail this year. So currently, the state has 84 active business improvement districts that range in scope and size in the sizes of the communities. So the communities as small as like in Eagle River have 1 or 2 bids, up to the city of Milwaukee, which have a number of business improvement districts. Broadly, bids are intended to create an attractive environment for business owners, residents, employees, and visitors. And that can be achieved through a number of different means. Downtown beautification, facade improvement grants, business grants, snow plowing, sidewalk clearing, anything like that can be attracted and part of the attraction for people to invest in the downtown area, coupled with the idea that the more people you get downtown, the more economic activity you have in the downtown area, and that the bid, quote unquote, pays for itself through that enhanced economic vitality. I'll just real quick, some successful example business improvement districts. The Wausau River District has been around for a number of years. I think this is probably one of the more famous things that the Wausau bid has done more recently. A huge attraction on social media, but they've hung umbrellas across 3rd Street near where the former mall site is. And if you haven't had a chance to go up to Wausau during the summer and see that, it's a pretty incredible site. Brings people downtown, creates Instagrammable moments, which is something that the business improvement district has leveraged to attract more tourists and visitors into the downtown area. Milwaukee's 3rd Ward, one of the larger business improvement districts in the city of, in the state of Wisconsin, is another really good example. They need a downtown additional, and then the downtown Eau Claire districts. I think they've got 2 or 3 that exist.
They actually have 5 now. 5 now. So one common thread that I want to point out through all of these districts is they typically have a really successful funding model where they pull in philanthropy throughout the community and through event marketing and from a few other revenue generating streams. They all do this to create foot traffic, real estate development, investments in infrastructure, public parks and amenities, and they all do it fairly well. So we've talked a little bit about what bids are and a few examples of them. we've drafted up the operating documents for the business improvement district, and we have that draft available. So if you'd like to review a physical copy, I have a few with me. But if you don't want a physical copy, you can quick scan in the QR code. I see one person grabbing their phones. If you want to grab in and take a look at that. That document goes over some of the operational information that Ryan pointed out, the number of representatives, the makeup of representatives on that bid board. And one thing that really wanted to discuss tonight was the funding and how we're pooling funding, how the city is contributing to that funding. And your recommendation for that, how that funding is being used because of some potential other matching funds for downtown associations and organizations.
Just real quick on the plan itself. So what you can download from the QR code is the operating plan. And that's the initial plan that has to be reviewed and approved by the city council. And then it gets sent to the state as well for review to make sure it complies with all those specific requirements in the state statute that I mentioned earlier. But annually after that, the bid board of directors has to submit kind of a strategic plan and a budget for review and approval by the city council. So if anyone's ever been part of like a lake district or anything like that, it's essentially the same general concept. Make sure if there's funds coming in, the funds that are going out are accounted for through budgeting. And that's just, there's the operating plan, and then there's the long-term kind of strategic planning that has to be approved every year.
So, and one portion of the update that we had discussed with the bid planning committee was the physical boundaries of the district. So only commercial properties within this district would receive that tax levy. And so any of these residential properties that you see spattered out throughout the district wouldn't receive, would not be taxed. But we expanded the district to include some of the northern properties for the north side yard and that development coming in and some of the other developments to the south. That way there is a fair amount of contribution into that pool of resources. So for those of you who don't know, the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, they do a really good job of creating data for us to review. And I know for a lot of you, data isn't really exciting, but for us geeks, data is fantastic. We get to see how other downtown organizations are creating funding for themselves and how they're using those funding, how they're using those funding streams to generate a more of an attractive place for the residents to live and for visitors to come into that area. So the top three funding mechanisms or funding sources that bids take advantage of or leverage is that business improvement district levy. But beyond that, events and sponsorships create the most revenue for downtown organizations. And I lump those two together because a lot of sponsorships are tied into specific events within districts. So you can see a really wide array of, or a wide range of funding that events and sponsorships bring in. But what they're successfully doing is pulling in funding streams from, or donations and sponsorships from non-downtown businesses, community-minded businesses that exist within their cities that recognize the value of it and help contribute to that atmosphere for the residents. The third largest fund is the general fund, other taxes gathered by the cities that those organizations exist in. So we all recognize that COVID was a pretty big dilemma, caused some economic upheaval for a little while, beginning in 2020. And so what the bid planning committee recommended that we do is find out if the city could leverage some additional funding to match in and get the business improvement district started. We didn't want to impose a significant burden on any one particular business that might force them to shut their doors or force a property owner into a situation where they need to raise rents for those business owners. So what we're recommending that the city do is start that bid levy at 50 cents per thousand. So if you own a $200,000 property, your property taxes would go up $100 per year. I think it's a pretty moderate amount of funding. But the city would be allocating to match that with borrowing from the TIF district for 5 years in order to help generate some additional resources for the downtown.
So just real quick, because TIF and bids can get a little confusing. Within downtown, there are 2 tax increment finance districts. I'm not gonna get into the nuances of what that is specifically, but essentially the city leverages new development in the downtown area for borrowing purposes for public infrastructure, planning, things of that nature. And so downtown, we have what's known as TIF number 10. And TIF number 10 was established in 2019. It's a relatively new TIF district, but we've already seen a lot of success with the North Side Yard project, Great Northern Distilling, the Berkshire Stevens Point project. And so there's a lot of new increment or new taxes essentially within the district that the city can now leverage to help fund part of the initial few years for the downtown business improvement district. The TIF district is managed and controlled by the city council. The BID business improvement district will be managed and controlled by the BID board of directors. So just, we can get into the nuances of each one, but if you have any additional questions, ask me afterwards. I can really explain kind of specifically what each function is for.
Also wanted to point out on that dollar amount, the state average for business improvement districts and the levy that they place on the properties within that district, the average is about $2 per thousand. So we're significantly below that average. I feel like that dollar amount is pretty reasonable. So you might see the $70,000 amount on there and that $35,000 amount from 2024 through 2027. Might be wondering why that specific dollar amount. The Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation manages a program for Main Street communities. For downtown organizations that are pulling in a budget of $70,000 or more, they provide access to this program. And through that program, you can receive trainings, planning support, and a few other resources for that organization that are valued at about $250,000 over 3 years, and then continued support every 2 to 3 years from the WEDC. So we picked that number very strategically, wanting to bring in those extra resources to support the business improvement district within the first 5 years to prove the concept and to help get some meat on the bones to show that there's some value in collecting that shared resource.
So the city has to go through the appropriate channels for that funding to be allocated. So we are taking that to our finance committee next week with a commitment of $70,000 on that first year and the $35,000 the following 4 years, which would then go to the city council meeting the third weekend of October, which I think is the 17th.
These are questions.
So year number 2 of 2024, we still have to meet that 70,000 for WEDC.
Correct.
What if we fall short? Or would we fall short?
So with the annual bid revenue being close to 40,000, the city would be supplying that other 35,000, so we should not fall short of that $70,000 mark through 2027.
But that's only getting us the opportunity to belong to the Main Street program. It's not getting us anything else.
No, but through that program, as soon as you're in that program, you have access to all the
I know,
resources.
I'm really familiar with WEDC.
Mike, you also had a question?
An assessment question. So you got a reval going in 2023, and I know very basic on that, but my understanding is that residential property taxes will probably go up, and so will commercial, but the residential will actually kind of balance. So the commercial that you're actually paying will be very similar, even though the assessed values will be higher. Is that roughly accurate for what you expect?
Well, so when the city does a citywide revaluation, which essentially the state of Wisconsin says, hey, your current assessed values are out of whack with the market. You need to bring those further into compliance, which is essentially what's happened. And we have a specific number of years that we have to do that. So we did start a reevaluation of the entire city actually last month, and I'll go through 2023. Essentially what happens is in a perfect world, the values of properties in the city go up, but the tax revenue collected remains equal, which means that your taxes will likely decrease slightly. Now, there are ways, and those of you who are on during the city's 2017 revaluation went through this, where the values went up, and the city council at that time decided to essentially, I'm not throwing council members under the bus, but backfill some of our capital projects by not reducing the total levy, which is a total taxable rate. And so we did see an increase in property taxes. How the policymakers decided to leverage that, additional assessment is up to them. But my suspicion would be because of the backlash they received in 2017, that we would see that per thousand value number go down actually. Really good question. And again, assessment gets really complicated and convoluted. So more than happy to answer anything after the meeting as well.
To Kathy's question, so that 70,000, it's not going to WDC, it just gets us over the threshold. Right. So,
Yeah, so that money is used by the bid board, is not sent to WEDC. We just need to prove that there is a $70,000 budget. And that gets you access to those resources.
You guys feel confident that, okay, so if I'm not in the proposed bid district and I have a private residence, we know that obviously some of my tax money is gonna essentially fund some of this, correct? I mean, it's not gonna, or is only the proposed bid district tax is only gonna be the one that's gonna fund?
So only commercial properties would receive the business improvement district tax. If you're a residential property or a nonprofit, you wouldn't receive that tax.
So I understand that part. What I'm asking you is the initial for the council to approve the city to fund this for the next couple of years. Where is that initial push of money coming from?
Sure. Yeah, so essentially the TIF district number 10, which is our downtown TIF district, has enough new development and new tax revenue coming in that can push that and pretty much set us up where we're not concerned about the TIF being in a financial state of distress or anything like that. There's enough new increment from Northside Yard, Berkshire, Great Northern that we can definitely justify that 70,000 in year one and then the 35,000 each subsequent year.
I knew you mentioned that. I appreciate you just clarifying. I guess I was just, my concern was that, this bleeds over into like the residential district of the city. And then people are like, wait a minute, why do I want to help fund this? This has nothing to do,
Yeah, and we try, honestly, the economic development team and the finance team, we have set up our TIF districts in a way that we would never require any general revenue or our general fund obligations to go to the TIF district. General fund is essentially your property taxes that like residential properties pay and commercial properties pay. TIFs are kind of a separate revenue source for us. And in some cases, municipalities overspend on the TIF and they've got to fill in that gap by taking money out of the general fund. We don't want to do that. It's terrible practice and terrible economic development policy. Good question.
My question's a run-on from, everybody's really running from Craig's. Mixed use buildings and commercial and residential, how's that taxed?
They're considered commercial.
So any residence in it, doesn't matter.
Correct.
I was say, if there's commercial in it, that whole structure, including the residence portion, is taxed.
If it's assessed commercial, which all of our mixed use buildings are, and that's a standard statewide practice, it would be taxed as part of the business improvement district. Yep.
So it's more about zoning than actual use.
Zoning and then physical construction of the property.
So that Northside Yard's the same way then, right?
Yep.
Everything is.
Yeah, everything on,
Commercial, it's taxed.
yeah, the first two buildings that are up at Northside Yard are considered commercial. The apartment building that's going up now would be considered residential, would be not part of the bid itself, because there's no commercial component on that.
And that, and we went through that map process before, kind of outlining the original meetings we had.
Yeah.
Berkshire project, is that in it?
Yes, because they have a commercial component.
What about across the street, which is currently the Edgewater, but it will be something else?
Yeah, so Edgewater Manor is owned by the city. We're in the process of raising the structure. So whatever would come forward, as long as it would have some type of commercial component, would be included as part of the business improvement district.
Yes, all the way to the riverfront.
Yeah, do you want to go back to the map real quick?
I think I remember that being.
So just for some clarification, of course, the shaded area is part of the district. Sounds River, Clark Street Bridge, Main Street, here's the square, Shopko, this is Portage Street. So Northside Yard is here. Right here is the Berkshire Senior Housing Project, and then Great Northern Distilling is right here. This is Rogers Street.
so does the council adopt the map?
Yeah.
So if I'm a developer and I want to develop Edgewater and I go to you and say, yeah, it's great, let's move forward, but I want to be taken out of that. you don't have the ability to negotiate that out.
No, in fact, in order to make amendments to the bid map, it would have to get approved by the bid board of directors, and then would be done once a year through the kind of that strategic, that operating plan that has to occur every year. And we have a bid board of directors that's pretty confident that this is going to bring additional bid revenue. I think it'd be hard to sell to everyone.
And then at that point, they would be setting up precedents for like jigsaw
Everybody
cutting out
bids.
stuff. And that's gonna be crazy.
Yep, exactly. That's a good question. So, anything else?
No. So we've talked about how funds are being raised and how they're being spent. I really wanted to lean into, so what? So why do we care about creating this resource for the downtown? The downtown seems like it's getting its storefronts filled. For some people, it's being filled at a rate that's acceptable, but there are still vacant properties that could use some support in getting businesses in them. There are service providers like the Stevens Point Alliance that put together a very significant volunteer effort in order to create this atmosphere within the downtown. And it's very taxing on a group of volunteers to be continuously hosting and supporting that sort of social atmosphere. So what we really are acknowledging here is that there's a way for us to provide support for those social organizations within the downtown, potentially shift over some energy into other places and create programs for property owners and businesses for it to be easier to start a business, for it to be easier to either acquire property or improve property within an area, and to also do it in a very strategic way that creates an atmosphere for a downtown that's very attractive for residents to live within, for employees to come to and work and to stay, and then for visitors to come experience what it's like to be within downtown Stevens Point. And the business improvement district is one way of creating that pool of resources and increasing revenue streams for the downtown to do that. As I mentioned, all of that, that's exactly what I'm putting on the slides. Sorry, there's a lot of words and it's a word salad. But when you think of improved quality of space, I really want you to be thinking of these three bullets. Over the long term, what we're hoping for within a business improvement district is an increase in amenities for the downtown residents, visitors, and businesses and property owners. That way, it's easier to manage your businesses. It's easier to maintain your properties. There are resources available for you to maybe weigh in on what sorts of development is happening and what can support you as a business owner or a property owner within the downtown. Over the long haul, hopefully, ideally, what this means is less work for your business owners, less work for your property owners, and a more enjoyable experience for visitors and residents. I'm gonna back up to funding because we talked about how much money would be raised so that way we can leverage WEDC support to have more training and facilitate a discussion and some alignment or strategy for the downtown. Within communities about our size, you see a huge chunk of that funding is spent towards salary. And salary is one of those important resources. You need to have someone who's well qualified, who's focused on your area. It's a really important piece of a business improvement district. If you don't have an 8-point person who is coordinating a lot of the services, who is responsible for the property owners and the business owners in the area, it becomes significantly more difficult for that strategy to develop and grow. The other large chunk of expenditures that you see for business improvement districts is events and marketing. Events typically are your greatest revenue generator. And with acknowledging that these are our two biggest expenditures within most business districts, there would need to be a little bit of alignment between the Stevens Point Alliance and whoever's coming in for this business improvement district facilitator or leader, because we have a group of volunteers who are coordinating a significant amount of energy, but there are opportunities to complement those efforts with either some larger scale events or ones that are revenue generating in a different way than current events are.
Improve the ones we have.
Yeah, we're not looking to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's no
Improve the
reason
ones
to,
we have.
right?
So this is where we're gonna get super interactive. I'm sure this is really hard to read from out there. Seeing that there's a lot less of you around here, I might just do this a simple call and response and some discussion. But when we think about all of the ways that funding can be spent within a downtown, within a business improvement district, the WEDC breaks it down into 6 different categories. And I've put them on this wonderful new dry erase board that Mid-State has put up. You guys must really like Christmas here because Christmas colors are hot. But you can break those down into real estate improvements, investments into public spaces, investments into infrastructure, business assistance programs, events and marketing, and community development. Typically, bids and TIFs don't fund community development in the way that WEDC classifies. But with real estate, we're thinking about these top resources: infrastructure in the second group, public spaces, business assistance, and events and marketing. The city of Stevens Point already provides a few of those services, so facade improvement grants is a staple for Wisconsin communities. However, with a business improvement district and a point person, there could be an improvement on that resource and how easily it is accessed by downtown business owners and how often or how much you can use, really redesign that program. Other projects that the city already leans into, we're talking about redevelopment of property. It's what we use the TIF for. It's generated a lot of activity so far with the Northside Yard, Great Northern Distilling, and the Berkshire Building. And this is what I wanted to lean into you all for conversation. There's a lot of different levers that we can start pulling within a downtown, but we wanted to provide some direction for that bid board. How should that funding should be used in our strategic plan? As business owners and property owners, what are the first few benefits that you would like to see within the downtown? While you think on that for a little bit, that's a really broad question. But Mark Christensen, Alder for majority of the downtown, all of the downtown that's in the bid.
Everyone except for the Chase Bank, I think it's about.
Not everybody.
Well, no, because Berkshire would be the best 98%.
So while we were out canvassing and talking to business owners and property owners last week, a few people stopped to talk to me about their experience with the downtown services already. And some of the most desired things from the downtown business owners that I talked to were grants or funding sources, perhaps even no or low interest loans for property improvement projects, things as simple as replacing furnaces and AC units and water systems and things like that. So it seemed like property maintenance concerns were a really high priority for the downtown business owners that I had talked to personally. I know it's not everybody, but it's everybody that I got to meet. There was also a lot of conversation about the facade improvement grant and how some business owners who don't have the capacity to connect with contractors to truly redesign a space feel that funding and that dollar amount is inaccessible to them. So having a point person to help them navigate that process or change the process would be very beneficial for them. A few other communities utilize bid funds to create special grant programs where they're incentivizing specifically interior renovations, and they do it as part of a contest as well. So anyone participating in the contest receives a grant to go renovate their space. They have an opportunity to win additional funding based on how they change their space and how they engage the community in utilizing that new space. So there's no holding back on what sorts of shared grant funding opportunities are out there, what sorts of design and neighborhood design or downtown design work that can be done within the downtown. So I wanted to open this up to you all for discussion at this point.
Good example would be like the Badger Bounce Back program. the $10,000 downtown investment. It exists now. We know there's a finite amount of time, although the governor, I think, just put a few more million into it. But at some point, that's going to run out. Could the bid pick up and maybe at a smaller, so 10,000 per applicant, a $5,000 opportunity for new businesses to come in and utilize space in the downtown area as a way to attract, and that's part of the economic development, community development aspect of the bid itself. So that's just something as a real high level example as well.
Question, why didn't you highlight signage under events and marketing?
So I can give you the full spreadsheet around it, but it's just something that the WEDC didn't flag.
Okay, I got it. I was just curious why you didn't highlight it. Because I think that's important.
I was just-
Marketing downtown.
Yep, so I found it interesting that the WEC didn't highlight that as a way that bid and TIF funding is leveraged. Because it's specifically in some of the services that they provide training and also design services to communities
Right.
specifically.
Which is marketing, yes, yeah, and signage, yep.
There are examples of other bid districts that have assisted either new or existing businesses in purchasing buildings. I think I see that it's property acquisition.
Yep, so I think my conversations with Eau Claire, they provide two different programs. One is a business launch support program where they help cover the cost of the initial launch, similar to the Main Street Bounce Back program. But they're, I think within the actual property acquisition aspects, they do provide two different services, not necessarily funding for some of those property acquisitions, but they provide some logistical support for saying you have this building or this property that could be used for a new commercial building. So how can we as a city incentivize a development there that meets the needs of you as a business owner?
So mainly logistical support, you said.
Absolutely. Yep.
You could have, I mean, a long-term vision could be, could you offer a lower no interest loan for a acquisition for someone in the downtown area? I think that would have to come after some savings is built up, because you don't want to be over leveraging the bid. Because in that case, the bid would probably be third or fourth on a mortgage. We do work with Central Wisconsin Economic Development Fund, or CWED. In fact, we have a couple of voting spots on that board of directors. So if you do have questions about, like, in the very near future acquisition, that's a resource that we typically hook people up with.
I think this is just based off, I'm sure it's listed on here, and I would agree with Kathy a little bit too, as far as like aesthetics of how the downtown appears itself. So
Yeah.
some of the things that we've had feedback on. We've had a lot of out of town visitors this summer. A lot of great feedback as far as, how nice the downtown looks, how clean it is. We had a lady come in today who was from Wausau, who now prefers to come down and eat and shop downtown Stevens Point opposed to her own city, due to the fact of how she likes all the new businesses that have been down there. She parked her vehicle at the beginning of Main Street down by Turquoise on Main, ended up going all the way to Main Grain Bakery to get things and stopped at different shops along her way. And she said, this is now her new routine. Now we'll see what happens when the weather starts to get kind of crappy out. But my point is that I think that we have some really good positive momentum on our side with how things have kind of changed around in the downtown. And I think a lot of that, obviously, I agree that events-driven things do boost, do boost sales, do boost economic value by having these events, but also the aesthetics. I think the city, I will give props to the city. I think one thing, at least out in front of our space, I think it's Schaefer's or Schulfer's landscaping company that the city, I believe, hires. They were out there today. They're doing landscaping. They're keeping the aesthetics of the downtown looking nice and presentable, relatively clean. The city's down there, in the trash. And so, I mean, I'm kind of long-winded with what I'm saying, but I think, a lot of the feedback, we have to listen to the people that are coming to our downtown and spending money. And a lot of that feedback has been that the aesthetics it's a very welcoming environment with the new businesses. Now, along with the bid, I think some of us that are business owners, some of us here that are renters, from a business owner standpoint, you know, we have apartments upstairs. We have younger renters that want to be downtown right now because they like the farmers market, they like some little events. They're, you know, the rent has gone up a little bit because of cost of living, so they're paying a relatively decent amount of rental to stay in these apartments. We're keeping the buildings up, so I agree with the maintenance side of things. We want to keep the maintenance up on these buildings, whether it's the facade or it's the internals of the buildings, so that we can attract these young renters to come downtown and spend good money. And if you have good tenants that are bringing money in, no different than Northside Yard, your buildings will be worth more. You're going to attract better businesses downtown because there's now that revenue stream for people to actually shop. Again, I'm kind of hitting a broad area, but I'm just kind of reiterating again a lot of the feedback that we heard from a lot of our out-of-town visitors that are now going to be making Stevens Point an annual trip, which is exactly what we want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we have this great opportunity with the US Open thing going on next year, where we're going to have a bunch of people come to this area. So making those impressions with the aesthetics, infrastructure, some of those.
Yeah, one of the things I think far too often is, you know, we live, eat, breathe downtown Stevens Point, and we as business owners, as property owners, don't fully understand what the third party sees, right? The visitor. And so getting that feedback and implementing that feedback. I know signage has been a huge thing in the downtown, and we are, the city's addressing that. You know, we were doing some wayfinding signage programs that should be rolling out here in the next few months. As part of the US Senior Open, of course, we want to get things up and running by then, but the downtown area is one of our main focuses. I know we've got some feedback from, I think that group or that stakeholder group for the signage as well. So yeah, identifying other things, that third party that isn't a resident and isn't someone who spends every day downtown. What else would we be able to do to make them continue to come downtown and build that economic vitality?
Yeah, the only two negative feedbacks, and again, it has nothing really to do with the bid, but it is a negative feedback, was the 2-hour parking. Sorry.
I was gonna bring that up in a minute.
We're not gonna go down that path, but that was one of the things that the lady today talked about. And then the what was the last one I had in my mind, and then I got sidetracked with the two.
Homeless?
No, not that. I'm not gonna go down that path either, but
It was a problem.
Every day.
what the heck was, the parking was one of them, and I can't remember what that, the one-way roads.
Oh, yes, the one-way
One-way
road.
roads, people that are not from here, it's confusing for them.
Yeah.
So anyways,
Yeah, and that was one thing that the city is working on, is correcting the one-way debacle of the downtown. We do lovingly call the downtown the center of island because you're surrounded by a concrete moat. And so we are looking for, and those are long-term improvements that we'd be identifying. Currently, it takes to get from Main Street to the waterfront is 7 lanes of traffic. When you have no need for 7 lanes of traffic, there's ways that we're looking to reduce that number of lanes there and actually give some of that right of way that exists back to the adjacent property owners so we can get some new development.
is that part, could infrastructure, could that not be part of that infrastructure? Part of the bid a little bit?
Yeah, so the bid has full bonding authority. There's a lot of things that the bid can do with the infrastructure. They could chip in for an infrastructure project like that. Massive infrastructure would probably still be paid for either on the TIF district or on the general.
Say, the TIF would be paying for the large portion of infrastructure for roads.
Right.
That's where our downtown TIF comes in.
Right, but if the bid wanted different lighting, that's considered infrastructure. You know, we've got Acorn lights right now. If they wanted something else, that the bid could pay for that type of placemaking activity. Our benches, newer benches, changes in our benches, that's another infrastructure component.
Banners hanging from the light poles.
Banners, yep.
Welcome to downtown. Flowers, whatever.
I just have a quick question here. So speaking outside of the spectrum, every time that I drive into the downtown area, the first thing that I see to the right is this big empty Shopco.
Mhm.
That is such wasted space that could be used.
Mhm.
You know, like
You gotta find a developer.
I know, but why? I mean, you have the structure there. And so, I mean, just to have a center, where people can come in and do different things,
Yeah.
And also as far as the homeless goes, I mean, why not build a shelter, because most of these people just don't have any type of help.
Yeah. So,
Excuse my.
the first part of that is the Shopko property. That is, planning activities can be part of the bid itself. More specifically, the city is working with the developer on the Shopko parking lot. The city owns that. That's a remnant of the mall. This building's actually a remnant of the mall as well. Beautifully redone, I should add, Ben. Nice work, although you weren't here, so. And then, the homeless discussion is one that's seemingly ongoing and there is no silver bullet. We do have a shelter in the downtown area. Frame Memorial Presbyterian Church does offer a shelter for overnight folks. I think they have a capacity, I think it's 15 right now, maybe more. And then Salvation Army as well. We've seen a lot of the folks that are downtown religiously are those who are just continually declining the assistance. And how do you get them into a better place and into the system that has support services around them to help them through the being homeless or unsheltered.
Yeah, the shopping and the dining is great. So, I'm really happy with it. And the wine.
For you, a question.
Sure is it.
Again, sure to offer, Craig, with the parking. So would the bid board have any, say for lack of term, teeth, like working with the parking commission to work on that 2-hour scenario, to massage that differently, how it could work? I mean, all the beauty salons always constantly come to us, to the Students Fund Alliance, complaining about that. This morning I had a 80-person funeral memorial luncheon, everybody started talking about the parking signs they read. I said, when you get the ticket, let me know, give it to me, I'll cover it today, so I'm already telling the guests, don't worry, if you get a ticket, just bring it to me and I'll pay it,
Yeah, it's kind of that odd,
We're gonna need teeth with the parking commission and with the city council to hear that statement again and again and again and again and again and again and again.
So one thing, the bid, there are specific lanes, if you will, that the bid would stay within. The parking would still be handled through the Board of Public Works. But recommendations from the bid should be something that's considered as part of a larger discussion about parking in the downtown area. Whether or not you increase that to 3-hour parking, whether or not you decrease it to half-hour parking. I think if the bid has something solid that they wanted to take to the council, to the Board of Public Works, is definitely something that they could do. How the council's going to take that information is totally out of the air because every April we get a new city council. Our city council 5 years ago is way different than what it is today, so.
One point that I wanted to make in response to that state, like parking and this question, is that with a Main Street manager or a bid manager, a large part of that position is to do a lot of that problem solving work and have your city council respond to the work of that individual. So I point that out because there will always be problems to solve and there's always something to gain by changing how things are done. Potentially acknowledging there's a new avenue to create a new business in town. That person is your point person for discussing what that problem is and creating a solution for it. And that's, again, why we recommend that with the initial launch of a business improvement district is that first step is identifying and hiring somebody to be the point person for the district.
So I have a couple of questions tied to that. So one is, I think you mentioned early on that the staff would act as the executive director for the bid board. Is the person hired to take over that role, or would staff on the bid board still be the executive director?
So, short term, one of us would serve as the executive director of the bid. like I serve as the executive director of the redevelopment authority as an example. The chair of the bid board, whomever that might be, works with the executive director on setting meetings and priorities and everything else. I think the more longer term vision would be that we might pull in someone to do part-time Main Street management. Neither one of us, wants to make that a majority of our time. And I think there's an opportunity for someone. And as the bid grows and as that annual dollar amount grows, there could be a conversation with that person who does more of a full-time role. The city of Wausau has got a full-time bid manager, and then I think they've got 1 or 2 marketing people as well.
So that person is critical and that person would theoretically be on your staff, correct?
Yeah.
Would the bid board have say in who's selected? So would is the bid board going to be part of that process of vetting candidates?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just like when I was hired 4 years ago, at the time, John Schleiss was chair of the redevelopment authority. He was part of the interview process and reviewed applications, resumes, and was a major component in who you hire. Because it's not a department head level, the bid board probably has more authority over hiring as an example. But things like termination discipline would go through city council and personnel committee.
So then the bid would be paying partial salary of a city employee.
Correct. Unless the bid wanted to have that as an independent position, which is totally reasonable, but that person, the bid would then have to pick up healthcare, retirement benefits of a full-time position, as opposed to the city already has those resources that exist, and the other resources of a position,
So then that city staff, they want to allocate their time based on salary requirements, right? Or how much they're working for the city, how much they're working for the bid.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a part-time position, 100% of their time is going to be focused on the Main Street program and the business improvement district. If it becomes a full-time position, 75% of their time would be focused on that specific area, or they could have 100% focused on that. It all depends on
The dollar amount.
How
of
we
the bid,
grow,
what we build,
dollar
right?
amount and how we grow.
you got to start somewhere.
$2, right?
Right. Unfortunately, you get JV team here with Chris and I the first few years, and then hopefully we get, to the B team, and then we get to the A team a few years after that. So, and that's mainly a statutory thing. Like the executive director, it's an important position, but as like the ED for the redevelopment authority, I do things like sign invoices. Right. We have a lot of loans out. I sign satisfactions of mortgages, but the bid board still has the total authority over how the bid operates. The executive director is just there to implement what the bid board decides.
I think that illustrates a really important point about business improvement districts too, is that they are generally created when the community acknowledges there's a gap between the services that the city is currently providing and what's needed within the area. And so I think what we've noticed is that there is that gap and it's growing. Stevens Point is a community that is fairly large and it is significant. And there's a lot of time and energy that needs to be focused in other areas and on other situations and other problems. And so it's time for us to generate that space for a new person to be focused specifically here.
So I was gonna say with that position, we don't have anybody at this meeting that is strictly just a property owner. And so their reservations are gonna be what's equitable. So events and marketing is gonna work for a certain percentage of your bid, but it doesn't work for everybody in the bid. So the aesthetics and the business assist fit into that. I feel like the person that's a staff is an easier sell for the initial money, but I do feel like you're gonna have some demands on that person when it comes to business assistance. And those are gonna be some of the things those people are drawn to more so, I think.
And, when I throw events and marketing out on there, I mostly include those as large revenue generators for programs and areas for property owners over in the long term. Both benefiting the businesses, but also creating a pool of resources that stays within that bid.
I'm just imagining somebody, if they're 20 hours a week, events and marketing could suck a big percentage of their time pretty quick.
It'll be striking that balance. I mean, and every person that comes into that position is going to have to figure out what their strengths are. And there's ways, we're not going to throw hypothetically this person to the bid board and say, just deal with it. We're not saying that city staff won't be the new supporting, a supportive role. example would be like facade improvements. If we're to expand that program and put it kind of under the purview of the business improvement district, you know, one thing is some of us have institutional knowledge on the facade improvement program. We've done a lot of the underwriting for it. We wouldn't expect that the part-time person do all of that work. You know, Chris and I or Adam can do a lot of the underwriting for that specific project. So
Just some idea though for potential growth. We attended a webinar on the bid district in Ithaca, New York, which is almost the same population as Stevens Point. Their bid now generates 1.2 million a year. And the type of stuff that they were able to do was incredible. We're starting out small and building on success. I mean, that's kind of the thought. 70,000 compared to 1.2 million, it's kind of, but it does show, you know, they were also able to demonstrate the types of things that they were able to do with that. And so if it's well spent, you know, I think we're choosing a wise path in starting small, focusing on some basics and identifying the needs that are there most urgently and address those. And then as opportunities arise, be able to grow and do more things.
The potential's there.
Potential is there.
I think that one started, I guess, when I was on that meeting too.
Yep.
That's like 50,000 or something they started with, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was actually less than the 70 and they grew it to that, so.
also, I had no idea Ithaca was like similar size to Stevens Point. Oh, yeah, they're great.
Similar size, university town. I mean, it
I always
really,
imagine a much
Yeah.
bigger community. but-
you know, it had water on one side of it. It really was very similar to what Stevens Point is.
So if I'm going to summarize a lot of the conversation that we're having tonight, it's to maybe step away or at least communicate wisely about how events and marketing are being used, focus more on these spaces of aesthetics and infrastructure, and public spaces, business assistance programs, and maintenance.
Well, except for the events and marketing is what brings in the money
Right.
to grow. So I don't know that you want to step away from that, because that's what's going to bring in money to do the maintenance on the real estate and the aesthetics and the infrastructure.
And that's what I mean by well communicated. So that way, if whoever's in that position puts energy towards events and marketing, it's in a strategic place. So it's either in events and marketing that they're leveraging outside community sponsorships or
Yes.
community sponsorships from businesses outside, or adding in a value added event that is, you know, Central Wisconsin's coolest hip hop competition.
And
you
getting
know,
volunteers, getting the volunteers to do it because they would have the resources,
to be a
the outside.
For the record, I would win the hip hop contest.
Yeah. So you break it down.
Well,
You're
I'm
the
not sold
director.
that we want to get to the maintenance piece. I mean, I do think that is a good play. Troy mentioned before residents. Downtown residents makes a big difference if you have people with, you know, disposable income staying there and shopping those areas. We've talked about, you know, getting a grocery store that's more local, apply to some of that, but that's a big pot of money. I mean, even the facade grant is considerable. That's probably double what we're looking at for budget now. So, I mean, 50 cents is one thing. I think to be transparent, you're really saying to property owners, it's $1 after 5 years. Beyond that, you're not gonna get 15 bucks a square foot for right downtown Maine. The idea of getting that up past $1 is a tough sell because the rent's not there. I mean, if you're operating a business, what do you care? You're trying to get people in the door, but if you're just renting out space, your rents are not gonna grow that much.
I think that is an important statement because there needs to be some strategy about what gaps that individual is filling first. So if we're thinking about businesses that are missing that are key keystones for a community, those spaces where there is a grocery store or a general store or something that is a staple for people is important. Thinking about those aesthetics for those residents who are coming here to live here for a particular reason. How do we elevate them just one more step before the 5 years runs out?
And the dynamics are changing a bit when you consider the number of residences that are between Northside Yards, 3 buildings, and Berkshire, and even, you know, Banter Apartments aren't far away. The Grove there's going to be one of the really positive aspects that we're looking at is just there's going to be a lot of bodies living in the area, potential customers And so we want to make sure that we take advantage of their their location, and try to identify ways that we can cater to them and hopefully
What their
convince
wants,
them to
what their
have
wants
their
and needs are.
disposable incomes. Yeah, yep.
What are their wants and needs?
To quote almost every millennial, we want to make sure that we can have them live their best life, you know, in the downtown.
Like a smoothie king.
Olive Garden, Red Lobster, you know.
Yeah,
Classics,
Yeah.
Costco.
And we don't have the rooftops for that, do we?
Yeah, so one thing too is, you know, the value added to just like building owners is there's economic activity, there's opportunity to bring people downtown. That reduces vacancies in our storefronts. And, you know, I think of communities that struggle filling their spaces downtown, and part of it is they don't have groups that are invested in bringing people downtown. You know, we've been lucky to have Stevens Point Alliance as an example that works really hard to bring people downtown. And I know Troy and Kathy are exhausted, and you know, this is a way to get more people involved in that process, and bring value to downtown and bring that vitality that I think we all want for generations.
So put a pin in this conversation for now, but I think you all have my contact information if you're a downtown business owner or property owner. Talked to most of you one-on-one before. So probably should receive my business card just in case.
I got it.
Great.
I got it.
So if you have any other thoughts that you'd like to discuss with me, give me a call. I'd be happy to answer a chat.
I do have one thing I just want to bring up, just for clarification for those of you that may or may not know, and make sure it's still part of the Wisconsin rule. If at any point, if the bid goes in a direction that the property owners don't like, 40% of that tax revenue, form a petition apparently or something like that and say, we don't like what's going on here, folks. We want to pull our funds out.
So
Factual statement?
Yep. So essentially, if at any time from when we have the public hearing to 25 years from now, either 40% of the total assessed value of the bid district, or 40% of the properties within the bid district have a desire to dissolve, they can petition dissolution. And that would go through the council and among other things. You know, of course, we want people to feel valued and set strategic visions for the bid itself, as opposed to just throwing their hands up in the air and saying we don't want to do it. But there are mechanisms.
For the property owners.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering,
You say if it doesn't go where you want it to happen.
to play devil's advocate to that, Shopko gets developed. Can Shopko lullaby Berkshire on their own? Is that enough to 40% assessed value with 4 or 5 parcels to pull the plug?
Associated Bank. Yeah.
So the bid becomes vulnerable then to some of the bigger players.
Yeah, we need them on board.
Yeah.
Do you have, what is the assessed value for the bid section right now?
I do. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay,
You could probably figure it out with the 39,000 something, do some multiplication.
doing that. It's your job.
It's on a
That's why
spreadsheet.
we need a manager.
It's on a spreadsheet.
So before we close this out, yeah, the plan is to have this brought to public hearing, voted and established by the end of the year. So we're here today to establish some of that initial vision, to revise perhaps some of the initial asks of the bid board. So that way when they are selected in their appointed positions, they have a clear responsibility to start within the first year. So we'll be revising that operating plan document in November. If there's any other concern or comment, we'll be fielding calls from now until then. And then in November, release the notice for public hearing. In December, it should be brought to.
Chris, can you tell us exactly what year we will have that money?
Starting in 2023. So
The TIF funds in 2023.
Okay,
Yes.
The bid funds will become accessible in 2020.
2024.
Right.
So the city is.
That's what I wanted everybody to,
The city has basically agreed to bankroll it the first year to make it, so we don't have to wait and get things up and
until
going.
2024, when we would actually have access to the bid fund. Correct. We have to collect a year of taxes to do that.
But there's resources now, so we want to take advantage of them while we can. So that's why we're taking the approach that we are.
And then the bid applications for people that want to be on the bid board, the mayor's office is the yes or no?
Yep. So there's a 2-sheet form that if you'd be interested in serving on the bid board of directors, you'd fill out.
Speaking of which, he must have been.
Mayor's office, and then he would make recommendations to council for whomever was on that. Council would then approve. And then from there, the board, that bid board itself would appoint, a chair or vice chair as part of it, so.
So that's about it for tonight.
Hi.
Sean, did you have any questions that you wanted to bring up at all? Okay. Sounds good. All right. Thank you. We had a few more folks in before.
There were 2 more that walked out.
Great.
Yep, that one, Craig and,
Well, but Fran doesn't own a business, she's not downtown.
Doug and Judy, did you have any questions?
No, Fran that would just walk
oh,
out.
yeah, she does.
Just remember, it's the downtown bid, not Main Street.
Yeah.
Downtown.
Downtown Business Improvement District. Got it.
Yep, but even in this meeting, there was a ton of talk about Main Street.
It's Main Street program, Doug.
Yep, but other things were mentioned where it was Main Street this, Main Street that, other than the Main Street program.
Sure. Well, we made a concerted effort to make sure we invited all Clark Street businesses and those off of Main Center.
Yep. I know.
Okay. We will continue to keep that in our messaging priorities.
Yep.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.